The morning my mother called to tell me my father had been in an accident, I was standing in the hospital parking lot with my 3-year-old son Eli on my hip and a stack of medical bills tucked under my arm. My husband Joel had been admitted 2 days before. Pancreatic cancer, the doctor had said, like it was just a word. Stage 4. Aggressive. We caught it too late. I thought my mother was calling to check on us. I thought maybe, finally, someone from my family was going to step in. Instead, she said, "Your father and I can't come down. He threw his back out. I'm sorry, honey." That was it. That was the whole call. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after she hung up. Eli pressed his face into my neck, and I just stood there holding him, watching strangers walk in and out through those sliding glass doors, everyone moving like the world was still normal, like nothing had ended. Joel died 11 days later. He was 34 years old. I remember the hospital hallway after. Eli was asleep in his stroller, finally, after screaming himself red for an hour in the waiting room. A nurse had given him a stuffed bear and he'd cried himself to sleep, clutching it. I stood outside Joel's room with the door closed behind me and I thought, someone is going to come now. Someone is going to show up. You don't lose your husband at 29 and face it completely alone. That doesn't happen. It happened. My sister Tatum called during the funeral reception, not to come, to explain why she couldn't. Something about her boyfriend's family trip to Scottsdale that had been planned for months. "You understand," she said. "Joel would understand." I didn't say anything. I just watched Eli sit on the carpet surrounded by casserole dishes. Nobody brought because the only people there were 2 of Joel's coworkers and our neighbor from across the hall. Joel's parents, Randall and Peg, stayed for exactly 40 minutes after the burial. Randall shook my hand. He actually shook my hand. Then Peg said, in this soft voice like she was being kind, "We're going to have to figure out the future separately now. I hope you understand. We have our own grief to manage." Eli was sitting on the floor eating a cracker. He was 3. He didn't understand any of it, but I understood. I understood that without Joel, I was just a woman they'd been tolerating. The weeks after that were the kind of weeks you survive in hours. Not days. Days were too long. Just get through the next hour. Feed Eli. Pay the electric bill. Call the insurance company again. Try not to think about the fact that Joel's salary was gone and my part-time accounting job at the dental office wouldn't cover rent past March. I called my mother when Eli got an ear infection so bad he couldn't sleep for 3 nights in a row. I was running on maybe 9 hours of sleep across 4 days, and I just needed someone to sit with him for a few hours so I could close my eyes. She said they were busy. I called my sister. She said she wasn't really good with sick kids. I called Randall and Peg. Peg let it go to voicemail. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor while Eli finally slept, and I cried until I couldn't make sound anymore. Just this silent shaking. I kept thinking, Joel, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be both of us. I didn't know that 3 miles away, someone had already decided to show up. My grandmother had never been what my family called easy. She was my father's mother, Grandma Vera, though she'd told me since I was small to just call her Vera. And the family narrative around her was fixed and simple. Difficult woman. Self-made. Kept to herself. Valued money over people. My father didn't speak to her for years over some business dispute I'd never been told the full truth about. My mother referred to her as that woman in a tone usually reserved for particularly bad weather. I hadn't seen Vera in almost 6 years. We'd exchanged Christmas cards. That was the extent of it. So when I opened my apartment door at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night to find her standing in the hallway in a gray wool coat, a small rolling suitcase beside her, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. She looked at me the way people look at something they've been worried about for a long time, but tried not to show. Her eyes went to the dishes in the sink behind me, the laundry on the couch, the dark circles I hadn't bothered to cover in 4 days. She said, "Pack what Eli needs for a week. I'm taking you both home." I said, "Vera, why are you here?" She said, "Because nobody else came. Move quickly. The boy needs a real bed and so do you." I started to say something about not wanting to be a burden. She held up one hand. I didn't drive 3 hours to have that conversation. You can argue with me in the morning when you've slept. I don't even fully remember packing. I remember Eli waking up when I lifted him and saying, "Where are we going?" in that foggy little voice, and me saying to see someone who loves us. And him putting his head back down on my shoulder and going back to sleep like that answer was enough. Vera's house was 40 minutes outside of Nashville, up a long gravel drive lined with oak trees. It wasn't a mansion. That's not the right word for it. It was a farmhouse that had been added onto and renovated over decades until it was something between a home and a compound. Wide porches, original wood floors, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and something slow cooking. She had a guest room already made up. There is a toddler bed in the corner of it with a blanket on it that I recognized, dimly, as mine from when I was young. She had made that bed before she called me. She had decided before she asked. I stood in that doorway holding my sleeping son, and I couldn't speak. "In the morning," she said quietly from behind me. "We'll talk in the morning." I laid Eli down and I sat on the edge of the bed and I breathed for the first time in weeks. Vera was up before me. She had coffee made and eggs going, and she handed me a mug without asking how I took it, black, which is how I'd always taken it, and which she apparently remembered even though we hadn't sat at a table together in 6 years. She asked me about the bills, not gently, not around it, just directly. "What do you owe? What are you behind on? What's the income situation?" I told her everything. I was too tired to be embarrassed. She listened without interrupting. Then she nodded once and said, "We'll fix the immediate things first. Then we'll figure out what comes next." I said, "You don't have to do this." She set down her coffee cup. "Your grandfather left me when your father was 4 months old. Did you know that?" I didn't. I had $40 in a checking account and a farmhouse with a leaking roof. My parents told me to come home and let them handle things. She paused. I didn't. I wish someone had shown up for me the way I'm showing up for you, so that's what I'm doing. I stared at my coffee. Eli was in the other room watching cartoons, laughing at something. "What if I can't figure out what comes next?" I said. She looked at me steadily. "You will. You're not someone who stays down. I've been watching you your whole life, even when you didn't know it. You're not someone who stays down." I didn't believe her then, but she said it like it wasn't up for debate, and that helped more than she knew. She didn't let me drift. That was the thing about Vera. There was no sitting around feeling sorry for yourself indefinitely. She had grief, and she had practicality, and she kept them in separate rooms, and she expected you to learn to do the same. 2 weeks in, she sat across from me at the kitchen table after Eli was asleep, and she said, "What are you good at that you've never done anything with?" I laughed a little. "What kind of question is that? A real one. Answer it." I thought about it. I'm good with numbers. I've always been. I used to help Joel with his freelance invoicing, and I found all these places he was leaking money and fixed them without even thinking about it. I had my accounting certificate, but I never went further because we moved for Joel's job, and then Eli came, and I trailed off. "You put yourself on hold," she said. "Yeah. And now? Now Joel's gone and I have a 3-year-old, and I honestly don't know who I am outside of being someone's wife and someone's mother." Vera was quiet for a moment. Then she slid a yellow legal pad across the table and set a pen on top of it. "Write down everything you know how to do," she said. "Every skill, every tool, every job you've ever had. Don't filter it, just write." I wrote for 40 minutes. I filled almost 3 pages. She read them slowly. Then she looked up. "You know what I see?" she said. "I see someone who can run the financial operations of a small business with her eyes closed. I see someone who's been doing it for free for years." She tapped the pad. "What if you did it for people who would pay you?" It sounds obvious when I write it out like that. But when you've been existing inside grief for months, obvious things aren't obvious. You can't see your own value when you've been told, by absence, by voicemail, by a handshake at a funeral, that you don't have any. I said, "I don't know how to start." She said, You start small. You start with one client. I'll introduce you to someone. That someone was a woman named Barb who owned a flower shop in Franklin that had been operating in cheerful financial chaos for 11 years. Barb was 62 and warm and completely overwhelmed by her own bookkeeping. Vera had known her for decades. She told Barb I was the best numbers person she'd ever seen, which at the time felt like a generous exaggeration. The first time I sat down with Barb's records, I found $14,000 in expenses she'd been double paying to vendors for 3 years because nobody had ever reconciled the accounts properly. Barb cried. Then she told 3 of her friends. Within 8 weeks, I had 6 clients. By the end of the year, I had 19. I worked from Vera's kitchen table at first. Then from the small office she cleared out for me near the back of the house. Eli started at the preschool down the road. He made friends. He started calling Vera Granby, which she pretended to find undignified while visibly loving it. There were hard nights. Nights when I'd put Eli to bed and come back downstairs and just sit with the weight of everything. Joel being gone, the life we'd planned that had dissolved, the fear that I was building something on borrowed time and borrowed luck. On one of those nights, Vera found me at the kitchen table at midnight, not working, just staring at nothing. She put a cup of tea in front of me and sat down. I keep waiting for it to fall apart, I said. Like I don't deserve this. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You didn't deserve what happened to you. That part is true. But you built what you have now, not me. I gave you a table and an introduction to a woman who needed help with her receipts. Everything else is you. I shook my head. I couldn't have done it without. You would have found another way, she said firmly. It would have taken longer. It would have been harder. But you would have found it. I just moved the timeline up. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. Don't confuse being helped with being rescued. You're not something I rescued. You're someone I believed in. The business grew. I incorporated it properly. Lark Financial Solutions, named because Vera had a pair of meadowlarks that nested outside the office window every spring, and I'd started to think of them as good omens. I hired a part-time assistant named Donna. I started taking on small business clients across 3 counties. A local paper ran a piece about women-owned small businesses in the area, and I was in it, photographed at my desk with Eli's crayon drawing taped to the wall behind me. I didn't call my parents to tell them. I didn't call Tatum. I didn't call Randall and Peg. But they found out. My mother called on a Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't recognize the warmth in her voice, that particular sweetness she used when she wanted something, which she hadn't needed to use on me in years because she'd never expected me to have anything worth wanting. Honey, I saw the article, she said. I'm so proud of you. Your father and I were just talking about how we should have been there more for you. I think we need to see each other. I miss Eli so much. Grandmothers need their grandbabies. I looked out the office window. The meadowlarks weren't there that day. Mom, I said, when Eli had that ear infection and I hadn't slept in 4 days, I called you. Do you remember what you said? A pause. Honey, we were going through our own. You said you were busy. Silence. I'll think about it, I said, and I hung up. 2 weeks later, a card arrived from Randall and Peg. Handwritten, which surprised me. Peg always sent things by email. It talked about how they'd always thought of Eli as their grandson, how family was important, how they hoped we could move forward together. At the very bottom, Randall had added a postscript in his blocky handwriting. We'd love to discuss whether there might be opportunities to collaborate with what you're building. Collaborate. I set the card down on Vera's kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, remembering Peg's voice at the funeral reception. We have our own grief to manage. Vera came in from the garden. She looked at the card, then at me. What do they want? She asked. They want in, I said. Now that there's something to want into. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Of course they do. What do I do? She set down her gardening gloves. What do you want to do? I thought about it. Really thought about it, not the reflexive answer, not the polite answer, not the polite answer. What did I actually want? I don't want them in my life, I said. Not like this? Not now? Then that's your answer. But Eli, I said, they're his grandparents. Vera looked at me steadily. Being a grandparent is something you do, not something you are. They had 3 years to be his grandparents. They made their choices. I wrote back to Randall and Peg. A short note. I said that I wished them well and that Eli and I were building a good life, and that the people in that life were the ones who'd been there when it was hard. I said I hoped they understood. I sent it without a return address. Tatum showed up in person that fall. She drove to Vera's property on a Saturday when she knew I'd be home. She called the main line, which Vera had answered, and Vera had come to find me in the office with an expression I'd learned to read as "this will be interesting." Tatum was dressed beautifully. She always was. She had a gift bag for Eli, something expensive from a boutique toy store, still with the price tag on, which felt either thoughtless or deliberate. She hugged me like we'd been close and pulled back holding my arms and said, "Look at you. You look amazing. I always knew you had this in you." I thought about saying thank you. I thought about letting it go, letting the fiction stand, rebuilding something cautious and polite and distant that we could both call a relationship. Instead, I said, "Joel's funeral was on a Thursday. You were in Scottsdale." Her smile shifted slightly. "That was a really hard time for everyone." "It was the hardest day of my life," I said. "You weren't there. Not that day, not the day before, not the weeks after when Eli was sick and I was drowning. You weren't there for any of it." She looked down at the gift bag. "I'm here now." "I know," I said, "but here now is easy. Anyone can show up when things are good." "That's not the thing that counts." Vera appeared in the doorway then. She didn't say anything, just stood there. Tatum saw her and something moved across her face. "You can't let her keep you from your family," she said to me, her voice going thin. "She's not keeping me from anyone," I said. "She's the one who showed up. You can call that whatever you want." Tatum left. I stood on the porch and watched her car go down the gravel drive until I couldn't see it anymore. My legs were shaking a little. I sat down on the porch steps. Vera came out and sat beside me. She didn't say anything for a moment. The meadowlarks were back. I could hear them somewhere in the trees. "You okay?" she said finally. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." She nodded. "Good." The call that almost broke me came in March, just after Eli's 5th birthday. My father called, not my mother, my father, which was unusual, and he was using the voice he used when he thought he was being reasonable. He said the family was concerned. He said I was isolating myself. He said Vera had always been a divisive presence, and he worried about her influence on Eli and on my decisions. He said, "She's going to pass on someday, and then what? You've burned every bridge for a woman who might leave it all to charity." I held the phone very still. "Dad," I said, "when Joel died, you told me to handle it. Do you remember that?" Quiet. "I handled it. This is what that looks like." I hung up and went and found Vera in the garden, where she spent most of her Saturday mornings. I told her what he'd said. She kept pulling weeds while I talked, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Are you worried he's right?" she said. "That you've given up too much by choosing this?" I thought about Eli at his birthday party the day before, running around the backyard with 2 kids from his preschool class, laughing so hard he fell over. I thought about the life I'd built at that kitchen table. I thought about who I was now versus who I'd been sitting on that bathroom floor. "No," I said. "I'm not worried about that at all." She smiled. Small, real, the smile she didn't hand out easily. "Good. Neither am I. Lark Financial Solutions is 3 years old now. We have 11 employees and clients in 4 states. I moved into a house in Franklin last year. Bought it, my own name on the deed, though we still have dinner at Vera's every Sunday without fail because that is non-negotiable and we all know it. Eli is 6. He is the most earnest, ridiculously kind little human I've ever met, which I choose to take as evidence that Joel is somehow still here in him. He carries the stuffed bear from the hospital everywhere still. He told me last week that when he grows up, he wants to build houses for people who don't have good ones, which made me have to excuse myself to go cry in the hallway for a minute. Vera turned 81 in January. We had the party at her house, which is the only reasonable place to have a party because it can hold everyone, and by everyone, I mean the community she has quietly built around herself over 80 years. Her friends from church, her former employees, the woman from the flower shop, a dozen neighbors I didn't know she was close to until I started living nearby and saw how people looked at her. At some point during the party, I found her standing on the back porch by herself, looking out at the oak trees in the dark. I went out and stood beside her. "Thank you," I said. "I know I say it all the time and you always deflect, but I'm saying it anyway." She was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather left me $80 and a leaking roof," she said finally. "I spent 40 years being angry at how hard it was to do it alone. Then I watched what happened to you and I thought—" She stopped, cleared her throat. "I thought I could either be one more person who let it happen or I could be the thing that interrupted the pattern." I felt the back of my throat go tight. "You interrupted it," I said. "We interrupted it," she said. "Don't shortchange yourself." Inside, I could hear Eli laughing at something. The lights from the kitchen spilled out across the porch. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called once and then went quiet. I reached over and took Vera's hand. She let me, which was its own kind of language from a woman who didn't hand out softness carelessly. We stood like that for a while, the two of us, while the party went on behind us and the oak trees stood in the dark, the way they always had, and Eli's voice rose and fell over the noise inside like something bright and continuing and undefeated. I thought of Joel. I thought of the bathroom floor and the parking lot and the handshake at the graveside and every door that had quietly, efficiently closed. I thought of a gravel driveway at 9 o'clock at night, and a woman in a gray wool coat who had decided, before she called, before she asked, before she knew if I'd say yes, to make the bed up anyway. Some people show up in the dark. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing that matters. Illy found us eventually, crashing through the back door with frosting on his chin to announce that Granvit needed to come cut the cake. He grabbed her other hand and pulled, and she pretended to be inconvenienced, and I watched him tow her back into the light, and I stood there on the porch alone for just one more second. Okay, Joel, I thought. We're okay. Then I followed them inside.